What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meet Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meet Sperm. My guest today is a very special fertility person. For more than 19 years, the fertility expert, Marc Sklar, has been helping couples struggling to conceive and women and men regulating their hormones and reproductive health with this virtual fertility consultations, coaching, and fertility programs. In addition to his Doctor of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, Dr. Sklar trained at the Harvard Medical School Mind-Body Medical Institute. He's the creator of Fertility TV, marcsklar.com, and reproductivewellness.com, and is the co-author of The Secret to Conception. The fertility expert lives in San Diego with his wife and 2 sons, where he has his 2 clinics. But he also works with couples all over the world through his fertility online coaching programs. Hi, Marc. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. And you're just such a wealth of information in this field. I remember when I was first starting, you were like, like little fangirl over here. So it's been a long time. And I, over the years, have gotten to know you, and you're just such a beautiful spirit. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. I'm happy to be here and known each other for a while. So I was excited to have the conversation because it's been a while since we've actually connected.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's get into it because you have done fertility for a very long time. So I know that you have incredible nuggets of wisdom to share with people. But can we talk a little bit about just your approach with, like, obviously you do acupuncture and all of that stuff in your clinic, but I'm curious about the big picture, like the online programs and fertility programs that you have. What have you found to be most juicy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know many have heard me say this. I know that you will wholeheartedly agree is that, and I don't know if it's so juicy in that way, is that I just find that, and unfortunately, I don't think this has changed very much over the years, that couples end up going down roads that they didn't initially intend to go down because they were told they needed to, I don't want to say force, but kind of strongly encouraged to go down certain paths. I should say maybe not needed to, but prematurely without trying other things and investigating a little bit more. And so for me, I continually come back to this bigger picture approach, which is, why am I in this situation today? Why am I struggling? Why are we as a couple struggling to conceive? And how could we really find answers? And for me, the juicy piece is that I just find all too often, and I think upwards of 90% of the couples that we work with just don't have answers. They have been going down this path for a year, 2, 3, and maybe at one point they thought they knew why, but by the time they come to us, they just really don't know why they've been doing what they've been doing, other than somebody told me this is what I needed to do. And they're just kind of following along, right? And not questioning that process. To me, that's the biggest frustration that I have and that I've seen come up over these years is just, can we really kind of take a different approach on the way we handle this sort of situation? I mean, I think if we think about it differently, and we're not there yet, and many of these couples, although some already have children, but if we think about it as if this issue was our kids' issue, what would we, stepping outside of our personal box, say to them if they had a health issue that they were struggling with, and how would you approach them? Because I think if I was having a conversation with my kid's pediatrician and they would say, well, they had X, Y, and Z. And I've been in those situations with my kids, as any parent knows. And they say, well, we have this. And I was like, well, do we know why? Do we know what happened? Do we have answers? Like, before we start, you're going to rush me off to the hospital or surgery or whatever it is. Like, do we have information that's going to tell me that this is the solution, right? What you're proposing is the solution to this issue. And I find that for fertility couples, that logical reasoning goes out the window. We don't ask those questions. We just say, yes, okay, I want this so badly. You told me to go do this. I'm going to do this.
I will literally do anything that anyone tells me to do without questioning it. And what's interesting also, I have a couple of medical lectures that I'm doing, and the title of it is Infertility is Not a Diagnosis. And I think it speaks to exactly
Hallelujah.
What you're saying. Yes, because it is like, what the hell does infertility tell me? Like nothing.
Nothing. It's not a diagnosis whatsoever. Now, there are a bunch of reasons for it, right?
Yes,
but infertility in and of itself is not a real diagnosis.
Yeah. And I think that that's where we first land into trouble, is because we accept this label that has been put on us. Yeah. And then the solution to that label is hormones, injections, all of the things.
Yeah.
And we say, oh, okay, well, if this is what I have and this is the solution, then it makes sense. But when we take a step back and say, well, what does this actually mean? Then we have a different question, and we would have a completely different approach if we started with that question. So I love that you started with this, because it actually is juicy in the sense that it's so vital that we ask the right questions, because it's going to lead us down a very different path. So let's dig into this, because you said there are a lot of root causes, and absolutely, I completely agree with you. So what are some of the rabbit holes? I call them rabbit holes. But like, what are some of the underlying things that are sometimes leading us to have a struggle where if we didn't have those things going on, it probably wouldn't be a struggle anymore?
Yeah. So this is a rabbit hole because it's really widespread and large, because there can be so many things that impact our endocrine system, our reproductive function. And as we're talking about this conversation, I should also say that I want to take a step back and say unexplained infertility is also not a diagnosis.
Absolutely. That's the worst, because unexplained is just saying, I'm too lazy to figure out why. And I'm going to give you this unexplained label. And unexplained in any field is not a diagnosis. Like, there is no idiopathic, iatrogenic. Like, these are all fancy words to say, we don't know what the heck is going on.
100%.
Or we don't know how to figure it out.
And I often tell couples who write that down or send it to me, this is my diagnosis. It's either we haven't asked the right questions, we haven't looked in the right place, or we've misinterpreted the results that have already been done. And that's really what it comes down to. And you mentioned laziness. I will say, I do think that's a big part of it. I think that's one piece, is laziness. I also think that on the Western side of things, whether it's your OBGYN or a reproductive endocrinologist, is they've been trained to look at things in a certain way, and unfortunately with certain blinders on. And so that piece is going to dictate how they approach your health and your fertility. And I don't necessarily blame them too much. I think part of it is that they could at least question the model and the system that they've been taught. But part of it is like, this is what they've been taught to do. So this is what they know how to do. So this is what they're going to do. So none of us should be surprised when you walk into your OBGYN office, because they're not trained in infertility, when they refer you to the reproductive endocrinologist or for the fertility clinic. That should not be a surprise. And you shouldn't also be surprised when you walk into the fertility clinic and they suggest IVF, because that is the only tool that they have. It's like going to a surgeon and being surprised when they say, oh, we should do surgery. They're trained surgeons. That's what they do.
All you have is a hammer.
Everything's in a nail. 100%. Right. So if all you have is IVF and IUI, we're going to use the embryology lab to do what we need to do. And this is what happens. And that's how that model is set up. And for everyone listening, I have nothing against IVF. I work with a ton of fertility clinics. I have a lot of respect for what they do. I just wholeheartedly believe that 70 to 80% of those couples go to IVF prematurely or unnecessarily. And there's a place for IVF with certain conditions, or if you've just been trying too long and time frame is just, you've said, you know what, I just need to try something different. That's fine. I totally respect that. but it's not the first line of defense or treatment when we're talking about fertility. It shouldn't be. It should be at the end of that chain. And so when we're talking about diagnoses, so that I got on a little rabbit hole about unexplained infertility, but there's a myriad of things.
I think it's such an important conversation because I think that it does honestly start with that label. I'm not even calling it a diagnosis because I don't agree that it's a diagnosis.
It's not, right. Yeah.
But it is a label. And sometimes labels are helpful because then we know where to start looking. But in the case of fertility, it's not where you start looking because as soon as you have that label, you're pushed down a path without being given the opportunity to question that path. Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes out of that. Well, this is what I was told to do. And if I want to do this today, this is my only option.
Yeah. I also think the reason we end up down that path is one, we've been pushed down that road or kind of told that that's the path that we need. But two is because of this timepiece, right? Most people start trying to get pregnant because they want a child now. It's not because they're starting now because they want a child in a year, right? So when you're in that mentality, this is something I want now, you're determined. Let's just say you've always succeeded in achieving all the things you wanted to achieve in your life. And now you want to achieve this and it's not happening. Then that piece also starts to dictate what you're going to do because the impression you're given is that IVF is also a quick solution to what you want. For those listening, it's not typically a quick solution because one, it takes some time to get ramped up in that process for the most part. And two, it's also not 100% successful. We're lucky if we're even close to 50%, which we're not. So on average, you need roughly 3 IVF cycles to be successful. And that number has not changed, maybe by some 0.1% in many, many years. Mm-hmm. So even with all the new advances in technology and all the new treatments that we do, because of the way that process is managed and how it's dictated, we still need the same amount of time. So it takes time to get to there. And wouldn't we want to, or shouldn't we want to, use that time to be more proactive in not only finding out why, but addressing those issues so that way actually you can get results faster. So it's a different way of thinking about things and the way that I prefer to approach it.
Absolutely. And I'm with you. I think that it is the driver is this need of I want this right now. I want this yesterday if I could. And then the visual that we have mostly from media is oh, I'm going to walk into a clinic and I'm going to walk out with a baby. And that's true for some people, but on average, that's not statistically the reality. Most clinics publish their quote unquote success rates based on 6 IVF cycles, actually. So 3 is kind of the bare minimum.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of times, people are frustrated because they're well, why didn't my doctor tell me that? Why didn't the reproductive endocrinology clinic tell me that the way they actually view the first cycle is that it's a test? It's a very expensive test.
Yeah. Right? It's an experiment. So I always refer to it as an experiment. Yeah.
And absolutely. I'm with you. I have no problems with IVF. I think it's amazing. I've observed a few IVF cycles inside of an IVF clinic and just been oh, wow, I feel the spiritualness of it, even in the medical context. But I think that it's still missing this piece, which is let's ask the questions.
Yeah. And to your point about how success rates are published in IVF clinics, we also have to recognize that by the time you read the success rate, whatever those percentages are, for those clinics, and clinics do not have to report. It's not mandatory. They do it voluntarily. So that's what you also will not find all the clinics listed there in the country. They are reporting that by the time you read it, it's 2 years later. So the results you're reading are, I would say, 18 to 24 months after they've actually happened, because they have to report them once they have actual live birth rate statistics. It's not just pregnancy rates. They've got to report it after the births have actually happened to gather all the information. That's a long time. And who knows, different doctors could be working there now, different embryologists, procedures could be totally different. So they're also not as helpful as we think that they are when we're evaluating that information.
Yeah. So I think that that's kind of the context or like the fabric in which we are operating. I feel like sometimes under the surface, kind of like hanging out on the edges. I feel like you're maybe a little bit more integrated with some of the clinics. I don't tend to be very integrated, but it's partly because I don't do acupuncture and I'm like, we're going to do our process and then you go to the IVF clinic.
Yeah.
And statistically, when we do our process, people are successful on that first cycle, right? And that blows me away because we've already said the first round for most REs is a test round. They're just trying to figure out how many drugs should we give you? What should we do this? What day should we implant? There's a lot of questions that they need to figure out. And it's successful in the test round, which tells me something we did probably had an impact. And I imagine that's pretty similar to how you guys have seen even the people that want to go down the IVF route.
So I would say yes to that, with the exception of those who come to us and they're actively already engaged with a clinic and kind of in the throes or in the process of all of that already. Then those statistics are a little bit different because we haven't had the time and ability to either do a full evaluation or make the necessary changes that we need to make constitutionally to impact that cycle. So I do often encourage those couples like, hey, can we take a step back for a moment? Like, I know you're anxious to move forward, but maybe we can reevaluate this just a little bit. And not everyone's accepting of that. And so we just try to meet them where they're at and support them as best as we can. I don't like to be the person that says, I told you so. So I don't usually say it, even though sometimes I'm thinking it. But I do think if we can go into it with an approach, we want to make that next cycle successful. And so what do we need to do that, to be successful in that next cycle? And some of that might mean we actually need to take a step back and kind of put a little pause on that process. And I know that pressure mounts up and for so many reasons from so many different directions. So it's hard to do that. And it kind of might bring upon like anxiety for different reasons. But I do think it's super valuable when we can do that. And if we go back to this initial question you said, which was like, well, what are those causes? If someone can't give me a real answer to that, I really think that we need to take a step back and find the real causes.
Yeah. So I want to dig into the real causes, but I also want to touch on this. Age thing is such a driver in this anxiety, right? Like, oh my God, if I pause this for 6 months, or I'm going to turn 40 next month, and that's going to like make it or break it for my IVF cycle. And we know that that's not true, but that anxiety is very real for people. So can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that on that note that we need to take into account. And I'll start with the age piece, which is first and foremost, the only thing you cannot change is your actual age, how long you've been living on this earth, right? We cannot change that whatsoever. Now, if you want to say what you really want to change is your cellular age, how quickly those cells are aging and degrading, then that's a different conversation because that is possible, right? But the other piece of like, well, I'm 40 or about to be 40 and my birthday is in 3 months. So I feel like I've got to do this now before I hit 40 in 3 months' time, which I hear variations of that statement all the time. I want those listening to understand you are not a light switch. It's not like all of a sudden you hit your birthday and on that day, your body said, well, she's 40 now. Let's turn it off, and hits the button, right? Like it doesn't work that way. So if we are a light switch, we're more like a dimmer switch versus just a paddle switch. This is just on off, right? You can push it up, you can push it down, and your choices in life, those decisions you make are going to impact which direction that goes. So I don't want us to focus on our age, even though everybody else in the fertility realm tells you to focus on your age. And that's why you have to make all these decisions. But the reality is, okay, fine. Like it's an overarching understanding, like you know where you are, how old you are. But whether you wait, especially this time of year, because I often have this conversation this time of year, like it's November. Do you really want to be doing an IVF cycle during the holidays? Wouldn't you want to rather just enjoy the holidays and just deal with the natural stress of the holidays? And let's just put that off till January. Like, oh my God, it's like 2.5 months away. You think that's okay? Is it okay to put it off that long? Like your fertility is not going to change dramatically in a negative way in those 3 months. And so I think it's really important that we understand that. And even though the pressure is put on you that, oh, you can't wait another month. I'm telling you, those statements are not given to you because they're concerned about your fertility. I don't like to be rude and make these assumptions, but it's about the bottom line. It's a business. Yeah. So you can wait. It's not the end of the world and the end of your fertility if you wait 2 months, a month, 3 months, 4 months. The caveat I give everyone to that is if you're going to use those months, those time in a negative way, you're not going to be proactive to change your health, improve your lifestyle, find answers and do the appropriate things to improve your fertility and slow down the reproductive aging process, then yeah, maybe you should do it now and not in 3 months or 6 months time. But if you're going to use that time proactively to make changes, to be actively engaged, to do the things that you are coached to do by whoever you're working with to support and improve your fertility, then absolutely, I believe that time frame is actually only going to improve and benefit you, not negatively impact your fertility. And I think that is a big piece to take away.
Yes. Amen to that. Like, I think that exactly what you said, you can do nothing. And that could be like an okay thing, depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
But if you are going to proactively make changes, those 3, 4, 5 months, how much ever time you give to a functional provider that is going to support you, you are essentially reversing your ovarian age. I don't care what age you are biologically. Yeah. If you are doing the things that are going to help heal at the cellular level, then you have just given yourself more time if you ever need to go back to that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And on this note about age, I think the same thing is true when we start talking about lab work. Everyone always tells me, I got 3 messages yesterday on this exact same topic. My AMH is 0.3 or 0.24, whatever that number is. Do you think I can still get pregnant or do you think I have time left? Your fertility is not made up, just like I said, it's not made up about your age. It's also not made up by one variable, one hormone, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's all of these things and so many of the things that haven't been looked at, but it's all of these things together that we have to look at like a painting, right? Like if you took, I just read this great book, involved art. So I'm going to use art as my example here. But like if you took a painting and we've seen those paintings with all the dots on it, but when you take a step back, it's a full picture, right? It's not one dot that made that painting. It's all the dots. It's all the brush strokes. Just like your fertility, it's all of you. It's your lab work, all of it. It's your lifestyle, all of it. It's your diet. It's all of these things that we have to look at.
Your partner.
Your partner on that, right? Like it's all of these things on a canvas that we could say, well, oh, I see the missing piece. It's right here and maybe right here as well, or whatever it is. So we're so much more than one number, whether it's our age or one number, whether it's AMH. If you're still menstruating, if you're still ovulating, you can get pregnant. And I think it's such an important piece that we need to take out of this piece, out of this conversation, because we're always told everything is so negative. You can't, you won't, you're too old, your hormones are no good, whatever it is. So we just focus on the negative, focus on the positive as well.
I'm curious if you have a cutoff. Is there any point in which you're like, I'm sorry to tell you, but I am not going to be the right person for you?
Yeah. So I think there's I
know I put you on the spot, but I get this question a lot.
No, I get the question too. So I don't think it's a bad question. So we do have a cutoff of who we will work with, but that cutoff can also be shifted a little bit. And so if we're talking about black and white, that cutoff is 45 and older. So if you're over 45 or under 45, that's where we have our line drawn in the sand. Does that mean that it's easy at 45? No. I think the majority of women who are 45 and younger have a much higher chance than if you're over 45, which is why we drew the line there. Now, I have many women who will approach me and say, well, I'm 47. Will you work with me? And my answer to them is usually, well, I'll do one call with you and see what the situation is to understand the bigger picture. And then we can talk about how we want to approach this if it's the right fit. And by that, I mean, if there's lots of variables around that. So a 47-year-old who says, hey, I want to keep trying for another year or two. I'm not interested in IVF. I just want the right support to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to give myself the best chance. I'm going to support you 100%. We all have hopefully the same understanding and reality of what the chances are. But you've just told me, like, I'm not interested in IVF. I want to try naturally, and I just want the right support. That's the right attitude. I'm right there to support you. Someone who's 47 who says, I want to do IVF, but I'm not willing to donor egg. I don't know many IVF clinics that would work with that person, right? So then I have a hard time working with that person because that situation, I don't think has potentially the same outcome that can be achieved at the end of it. So it just depends on the circumstances. But really that line is 45.
Okay. Yeah. Also, you mentioned it in terms of like you're menstruating and ovulating, and that's a really good sign. Is the opposite not a good sign? So if someone's not having a menstrual cycle, is that a deal breaker? And I know like there's so many reasons.
Yeah, so many variables. Yeah, right. And that's what I was going to say. No, depending on why that's happening, right? And then we have to start to compound all the other variables in play. So if someone's 45 and it's been a year and they haven't had a cycle, that's a different scenario than someone who's 35 and might have hypothalamic amenorrhea. And so I think of that situation in a very different way because there's been a lot of women that I've helped in that situation, right? Yeah. So yeah, it just depends as well. Like we could group PCOS into that conversation. And if that's a diagnosis that has led to you not menstruating, then I'll think of that situation differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I think that there is so much nuance.
Correct.
And I think that providers like us struggle with it because other types of providers are like, nope, sorry, that's a no-go, right? Like you're 42, you need an egg donor, period. We're done with this conversation. Right. And it's like, there's just so much nuance in where you're trying to go, what path you're trying to take, what type of things are your body saying about where it is in the journey of fertility, perimenopause, menopause. There's so many things that are happening.
Yeah, I love that statement you said is like, there are so many nuances to what we're doing and how we evaluate somebody. And so it is difficult. I'm sure you get a ton of questions just like I do on a regular basis, asking questions. Can you help me? They give you like 3 bits of information and they're like, do you think I could get pregnant? And I hate my answer often because it's like, well, I don't know. I need more information. And that's where the nuance comes in because there's so many variables around this that need to be considered as we're addressing and trying to answer those sorts of questions.
So can we talk a little bit about, do you have a set of hormones that you like to see upfront when you're trying to evaluate someone as far as could you work with them or not?
So everyone who joins my coaching program can't have their call unless they've done all those hormones, all those testing.
Yeah. So what are those tests?
And it's much more than just hormones, but it's FSH, LH, estradiol, DHEA, testosterone, free and total, sex hormone binding globulin, prolactin, AMH. I don't think I'm missing something, but I think those are the big ones. Yeah. They also have to have a full thyroid panel. And by full, complete thyroid panel, I mean like all your thyroid hormones and antibodies. We
7
also
of them, you guys.
Yeah.
Not one.
Not one or 2. And we ask them to have a lipid panel, CBC, CMP, vitamin D, homocysteine, iron. We're looking at all of that. That's the bare minimum for everybody. We can make some exceptions, like sometimes in certain countries, they have a hard time getting certain things. And so depending on what that is, we'll make exceptions for that. I also tell everyone, if you've been going to your doctor for an annual visit, odds are you've had some of those basic things that I mentioned secondarily. So it's just also about looking back at your labs. But those hormones are often missed because often they'll just do AMH and nothing more, or FSH and nothing more.
I can't believe the number of women that we talk to every single day that are like, well, I have AMH and FSH, or I have only this one, or I have estradiol and FSH, but nothing else. Yeah. And it blows my mind because how can you get the full picture? How in the world can anyone tell you what's happening with your fertility without the basics?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I agree with you 100%.
So I'm glad that we see the same things and we're kind of on the same page, I think, in a lot of ways in terms of just do all the blood work that you need, because without that information, I am presuming that you are interpreting that information through a different filter than the conventional, like, oh, everything was normal. I'm like, 100%. Yeah, that tells me nothing.
Yeah. Right.
Give me the numbers.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is, you'll get this statement from somebody, someone will IM me on Instagram and just be like, so I was told all my hormones look great and the semen analysis looks fine. Why can't I get pregnant? How am I supposed to answer this question? Right. I don't know. Odds are you haven't had all the labs done and they might not even look normal, but you were told they look normal.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because I feel like, at least in the US, live in a country where we have access to all of it. There are so many labs these days that you can order your own stuff. You don't have to rely on your doctor that much anymore.
Yeah.
But where the gap is still in the interpretation, like you still need someone who can look at the whole landscape. I like this visual that you have of the painting and being able to take a step back and see like, oh, you're missing this one little brush stroke over here. And without that, you're shooting a lot of stuff in the dark, or you're trying to put pieces together that just are not going to get you there. It breaks my heart at sometimes because I'm like, I'm sorry that you've struggled with this for 7 years and no one bothered to look at it.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's a byproduct of the medical system that we are in a medical system that is very much focused on specialties and making sure that we have so much knowledge about a very small, narrow space that everything is evaluated with blinders on. In the long run, I think that's a detriment to our overall health and reproductive function, or any system we're talking about. Because if you've got your blinders on and you're either not willing or able to look just to the left or the right of the situation to say, you know what, it's not just this. It's also stress or your digestive system or your immune function or whatever it is that else is at play. They have their blinders on and they don't know how to manage that piece simultaneously. And maybe sometimes they know enough to be able to say, well, I think you need to go talk to somebody else about this specific condition. But then the left arm's not talking to the right arm because that person's going to do this over there. This person's going to do this over there in isolation. No one's really communicating because they're like, well, they've got it taken care of. How do we know all of that is being supported? And that's really the beauty of functional medicine and what we do is that, yes, we have specialties, but we also have a broader knowledge and understanding of the entire body and how it should be functioning. And we're able to take a step back and see how those different systems are potentially impacting the one that we're focusing on right now. And what are we going to do? It doesn't mean we sometimes don't need help from other providers, but what are we going to do to make that happen in a more cohesive fashion?
Absolutely. I think the root cause or the underlying scenario question is really where functional medicine shines. And in the context of fertility, I think it's crucial for your provider that is specialized in this thing to be able to understand how your gut impacts your vaginal microbiome, which then impacts your IVF success rate, because that's going to figure out whether or not implantation is going to happen.
Yep. You said it beautifully. Like that's 100% correct.
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I think we are in this like specialized thing, and there are so many functional providers out there. But if they don't understand how that piece connects to your fertility and help you see the dots and connect those dots for you, then it's still shooting in the dark, because even though you may know that you have SIBO, it doesn't actually help you because what's the connection? Why is my SIBO affecting my fertility?
Right.
That's still a question, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about so much. I appreciate you. I feel like every time we see each other or have a chance to talk, it's like I get excited because like we're on the same vibe, right? And for those of you that can't see us, we're wearing the same color. I don't know how that happened.
You did not text me.
No, did not plan this. But it's so lovely to just connect with people that are on the same vibe as us, because it's not every day that I get to have these conversations. So I truly appreciate you joining me and just like jamming on it. We didn't really have a plan for this conversation, but it's perfect.
It went in a great direction, and I always enjoy having these sorts of talks with you. And we were on the same vibe is what I was thinking. So it worked out really well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And we are going to wait and look forward to your tips for the rest of the week.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.